Hey, folks, this podcast is brought to you by King Arthur Capital Group. Fund your fight camp, showing fighters how to leverage credit and capital so they can treat their career like a business. Go check out the interlude episode I did with David King Arthur McElroy. Follow them on Instagram at King Arthur Capital Group. Like I've said before, very excited to share that information with as many people in the combat sports world as possible. Such a prevalent topic for fighters and managers and whoever else alike. If you're looking to, help your career work a little bit smarter for you, get your finances in order, help treat your career like a business, hit up King Arthur Capital Group, get that part of your life right. And check out Fight Club Crate, mystery fight gear, knockout prices, undisputed value, combat sports boxes delivered monthly. Use my promo code TAPTHAT15 at Fight Club Crate for 15% off of your first purchase, and follow those folks on Instagram at Fight Club Crate. Very cool stuff that they put together, very unique items that, people in the combat sports world will be interested in, of varying categories of products. Finally, a winner of a gift idea for the combat connoisseur in your life. Again, that's Tap That 15 at Fight Club Crate for 15% off your first purchase. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 209 of the Tap That MMA podcast. Looking forward to UFC Perth in a few hours.
Oh, come on, mate. You wouldn't have two bombs.
I decided to go ahead and do this late. We got UFC Perth starting at 4 a.m. It is 11:37 p.m. Eastern time, so kicking off in just a few hours. But folks, it's a big weekend of sports in general. We got the Kentucky Derby tomorrow night. All the post times are way later than usual. That's throwing a monkey wrench in everybody's plans. But in the world of boxing, we got Inoue versus Nakatani happening in just a few hours too. Benavidez versus Zerda. We have PFL Sioux Falls. For my picks on all that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Check out all my recent interview episodes. I keep, putting out interesting conversations. Just talked to the famous Will Davis out of Derby City MMA in Louisville, Kentucky. Go check out that episode. Got more on the calendar coming up. And check out my UFL betting picks that I've been putting out every week now that I am, currently independent, looking for some other places to produce some other content for. But right now I'm just putting out UFL betting picks on my own. Shout out the Columbus Aviators. They got the win tonight over the Houston Gamblers. As far as this week goes, I'm going to try to get this out of the way quick, make it a short and sweet episode. I say that every time, but we got 13 fights and we got like 4 hours till the card starts. So let's get started with Cody Steele versus Dom Marfan at lightweight. Cody Steele is the -140 favorite. Dom Marfan the +120 underdog. Now, I see why Cody Steele is the favorite. Does have a win on the Contender Series. His loss was to Rong Zhu by decision in the UFC. 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards. Dom Marfan, Street Buddha, born in the year 2000, actually 5 years younger than Cody Steele. He's taller. He has a 4-inch reach advantage. Dom Marfan, usually I stray away from the guys who have had mostly road to UFC experience. Dom Marfan, like I said, still a young fighter. 5 wins by decision in his pro career, and just like a very steady, consistent fighter. More importantly, he's obviously had competitive fights in Eternal MMA and in the world of Australia, relevant to this card. And there's only he has 2 professional losses, but only one man has ever beaten him as a professional 2 years apart, and that was Killian Salkild, both in Eternal MMA. I think Dom Marfan is slept on in this matchup. I think, I definitely respect the professional pedigree of Cody Steele coming from Fury FC. He's had definitely a lot of competitive fights there. He's got a lot of pro grappling under his belt as well. I'm not, I'm not dumping on Cody Steele at all. And win over Chasen Blair in the Contender Series. That is what it is. Chasen Blair 7-4. He hasn't turned out to be the most consistent of professionals, but he's got a handful of wins in Cage Warriors too. So I'm not saying that Cody Steele is not a quality fighter, but I think this is a closely handicapped fight for a reason. And I think Damar Fan, as he improves, certainly has what it takes to end up getting this, especially if it goes to the judges' scorecards. Give me Damar Fan money line, hit it. Next up, we've got a welterweight matchup between Jonathan Mikalev and Thimba Gorimbo. Mikalev is the -220 favorite. Gorimbo, the +185 underdog. Let's start with Gorimbo. Gorimbo has lost 2 in a row. So much about Thimba Gorimbo has been suspect, even his 4-fight winning streak in the UFC. The losses he's taken, like he got submitted by AJ Fletcher, he got submitted by Vicente Luque in a fight where it was one of those that in hindsight we look back and we're like, what were people thinking? But Luque was thought to be very much donezo by that point. But Gorimbo got him back in the win column, and then he lost a unanimous decision to Jeremiah Wells, which isn't that bad. I'm not, but the wins over Nico Price, Ramiz Brahimaj, before, Ramiz Brahimaj was, that was the loss before he beat Mickey Gall, and then he kind of went on a nice little run there. Pete Rodriguez, Takashi Sato, those do not mean a whole lot to me. Now, Mikalev, he's 8 years younger. They actually have the same reach at welterweight at 77 inches. It's pretty crazy. These are some big welterweights. But Mikalev has looked fantastic in the UFC, 9-1 as a pro. Got a submission on the Contender Series, beat Kevin Jousset by unanimous decision in his real UFC debut, 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards, and got a knockdown. And then he's coming off a second-round rear naked choke over Obon Elliott, January of this year at UFC 325. As a professional, out of Mikalev's 9 professional wins, 4 have been by submission, 2 have been by knockout. He hasn't had a knockout since November of 2022, 2 fights into his pro career. So I don't see that as all too likely. Only 1 pro loss was for the Hex Welterweight Championship to Alden Bates back in March of 2024. Bates is now 9-3 as a pro. But, Mikalev, like I said, still 27 years old. And, whether he wins by decision or by submission, I think that this is way outside of the ceiling that Thimba Gorimbo can handle. So, Mikalev -220 in a parlay is not horrible to me. Mikalev to win by submission +170, I think, is the most likely, but I think you're getting value too with Mikalev +250. Mikalev to cover -3.5 is -130. I think that's one to look at, and I think method of victory, double chance, decision, and submission is the other one to look at in this fight. Next up, we've got a middleweight matchup between Wes Schultz and Ben Johnston. Now, Wes Schultz here is the +122 underdog. Johnston, the -142 favorite. Let's start off talking about Ben Johnston. 5-1 as a professional. Got an old-timey mustache. He looks like his picture on Tapology, I'll show you. He looks like this looks like a mugshot of someone going to prison in Australia, back when it started as a colony. So I respect that. Now, he's 35 years old. 35 years old.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
But see, that's not completely accurate. I am impressed by what Johnson has done in his pro career. His last loss was only pro loss was March of 2022. And it wasn't impressive until his last fight, because he had submitted a lot of opponents, but they were 3-2, 1-0, 0-2. But then he won the Eternal MMA middleweight title over John Martin Frazier March of 2024. Frazier's 11-5, 33 years old. He's got 2 wins in UAE Warriors in a row last year in 2025. So Johnston, even though there's not much to his professional resume, you can certainly give him a lot of credit for that win over John Martin Frazier for the Eternal MMA title. Problem is, man, he's 35. This is going to be his 7th pro fight. And at 35, he hasn't fought in over 2 years. Wes Schultz, on the other hand, 29 years old, so not 35. That helps. He's never lost by submission. He has 2 wins by knockout, 2 losses by knockout, and 1 win and 1 loss by decision. 4-1 in LFA, 1-1 in the Contender Series. The only losses as a pro for Wes Schultz was to Dylan Buka by unanimous decision January of 2023. And okay, that's at least a guy that's been in the UFC and has, hung around the UFC longer than a lot of people expected. He got knocked out by Mansour Abdul Malik on the Contender Series in his first Contender Series appearance. And then he's coming off a round 1 knockout loss to Damian Pinas. The Baba Yaga, 9-1 as a pro, 24. I mean, Pinas is definitely a killer in his own right that has proved a lot on the Contender Series and in his UFC debut, where you didn't necessarily know what he had, what the quality was that he had done before coming into those opportunities. But Schultz got a Sulov stretch on Mario Mingaj on the Contender Series. Submissions and finishes over opponents that were 6-3, 4-2 in LFA, 11-6. 11-6. He's been in LFA since his second professional fight. He's got amateur kickboxing experience. He submitted Jackson McVeigh back as an amateur. I know that the sentiment is low on Wes Schultz, but for the love of God, man, like Benjamin Johnston, 35 years old, 7th pro fight, hasn't fought in over 2 years. And the fight you're coming back for and you're a favorite in when 4 out of your 5 pro wins have come by submission. You're fighting a guy who has mostly won by submission too, has never been submitted, and you're debuting in the UFC after 2 years of not fighting in Australia. Benjamin Johnson, I have to say,
fuck off. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
On that logic, give me Wes Schultz money line plus 122. Hit it. I think like submission is on the table for Schultz. I don't think you need to do it. He is the underdog. But I think there's a lot of outcomes that are possible here because these are guys with some of the same strengths, but there's just so many variables there with Johnston and being 35 and not having fought in 2 years. Next up, we've got a bantamweight match between Colby Thickness and Vince Morales. Colby is the minus 140 favorite. Vince, the plus 120 underdog. Let's talk about Vince Morales first. I'm surprised that Colby isn't more of a favorite. Vince Morales has lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row. Not to bad fighters, and he hasn't been finished in any of those fights. It's not that Vince Morales is ancient either. He was born in 1990. Those decision losses were to Jonathan Martinez, Miles Johns, Taylor Lapilus, Elijah Smith, and Raul Rosas Jr. Several of those were close statistically, but his last win in MMA, December of 2021 over Luis Smolka. Remember that name? And he had 2 wins in a row. One was Draco Rodriguez, and his other win in the UFC was Ayman Zahabi. But overall, counting the Contender Series, Vince Morales' record in the UFC is 3-9, and hasn't won in over it's been like a little less than 5 years, like 4 years and 5 months or whatever. That's a lot. And Colby, as an 8-1 professional, is coming off of that unanimous decision win over Josias Musasa. Now, you can certainly question Musasa in where, what he accomplished as a pro before coming into the Contender Series in the UFC. Colby, was, of course, like a champion in Hex Fight Series. He was the bantamweight champion there. he didn't fight anybody like too reputable. He had a good amateur career too, where he competed in some of those international competitions. You always like to see that. And the only loss in his professional record is to Alexandra Topuria back in February of 2025, who we didn't know what he was necessarily capable of at the time. He has gone on to beat Beksat Almakan by unanimous decision too. So Alexandra Topuria just looks to be kind of legit. Musasa, hard to say because he lost both his fights in the UFC after the Contender Series. But, with is this within Vince Morales' wheelhouse at 35 years old? Possibly. His fights in the UFC came in between or came separated by some fights in Front Street fights. He fought in Ryzen against Yuki Matoya. He won that. He fought in Tough Enough and United Fight League, where he beat Hunter Azor for the UFL Bantamweight Championship. If Vince Morales was like plus 200, I'd be all over that. But in this closely handicapped fight where we're talking about a guy in Colby who is still, he's 26 years old, still improving, has a UFC win under his belt. You totally understand how the first UFC loss happened. This is one where you can take Colby money line minus 140 and be happy about it. And that's what I'm going to do. Hit it. Next up, we've got a middleweight matchup between Jacob Malkoun and Gerald Meerschaert. Jacob Malkoun, if you can believe it, Jacob Malkoun is the minus 1,800 favorite. Meerschaert the plus 900 underdog.
Fuck off. Take care of the underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
So let's take a look at Meerschaert first, okay? Meerschaert, born in 1987, automatically a ding against. His last win was 5 fights ago with a submission over Edmund Shabazian. There was a second there where Meerschaert was on a good run because he had also submitted Brian Barberena. Meerschaert has been in the UFC since 2016, but he's been quite active. He's fought a lot of really good fighters. He, fought Hamzat and Kevin Holland, Jack Hermanson, Thiago Santos. None of those are wins. Eric Anders, Christoph Jotko, Joe Pfeiffer, Rainier de Ritter, Brad Tavares. These are all recent. He's now on a 4-fight losing streak. He's been finished in 3 of the last 4 fights. The only one he wasn't finished in was the Brad Tavares fight. I was disappointed in him for that one. I thought that one was when he could have gotten done. But, we're now looking at like the last win for him being close to 2 years ago against Edmund Shabazian, who now is on his own 3-fight winning streak at least. And, Meerschaert has fought good fighters over this losing streak. And it's just like, it's getting close to the end for him, clearly. When you're approaching the age of 40, you've lost 4 in a row. You've lost 6 of your last 8 fights in the UFC, dating back to April of 2023. Now, Malkoun, 8 years younger, will have a reach disadvantage of about 4 inches. He's shorter by about 4 inches. But Jacob Malkoun has quietly racked up a good record in the UFC since April of 2021. He's won 5 of his last 7 fights, 3 of his last 4. Beat Nick Maximoff by unanimous decision, beat Andre Petrosky, knocked him out partly with his hip bone, as I recall, and is coming off a unanimous decision win over Torres Finney. What you like about Malkoun in these spots, and especially against a dude like Gerald Meerschaert, is when Malkoun needs to throw volume strikes, he can do it, as we saw against AJ Dobson, Nick Maximoff, Torres Finney. Doesn't do a lot of finishing. And by the way, the only reason there's a loss in his last 4 fights is because of the DQ against Cody Brundage in a fight that, was in the first round, but he was on his way to winning. Even though it's early, we can't say. And his only other losses in the UFC are to Brendan Allen by unanimous decision, losing 29-28 on all 3 scorecards to Brendan Allen. And then he got knocked out by Phil Hawes in his UFC debut without throwing a strike or I think even attempting a takedown. It was early. But we've also seen high volume takedowns from Jacob Malkoun on several occasions. 8 against Abdulrazak Hassan, 6 against AJ Dobson, 7 against Brendan Allen in the fight that he lost. 9 against Nick Maximoff. That's not an easy thing. And 2 against Torres Finney and didn't get taken down in the one takedown attempt that Torres Finney had in that fight January of this year, in a fight that didn't make sense for him stylistically. So you wonder what he was up to there. This is a bad matchup for Gerald Meerschaert. Like, I think if they start throwing hands with volume on the feet, that's going to be an advantage to Jacob Malkoun. I think Meerschaert is going to be willing to go to the ground. That's where his, best, that's where his strengths lie. That's where his best path to victory is. And if that's where Meerschaert wants to be, I think Malkoun will put him there. And Jacob Malkoun has never been submitted in the UFC, and Jacob Malkoun has never been submitted as a professional. Jacob Malkoun hasn't been submitted as an amateur. So he's not an easy guy to submit. That's what Gerald Meerschaert's going to be looking to do. I don't see this going Meerschaert's way if it goes to the judges' scorecards. If it ends up being a finish, it's hard to see that going for Meerschaert either. Meerschaert's very good on the ground. Not saying he can't submit Jacob Malkoun, but he's going to be working this entire fight to, try to be in the position he wants to be in to, look for a finish. That's going to be really tough. So it's really hard to know what to do here. Like, I see the logic totally in Meerschaert plus 900, just because this is such a crazily handicapped fight. You just don't expect to see these two names next to each other with these numbers. Malkoun by decision is actually plus 225. Malkoun by knockout is plus 115. But, that hasn't been an incredibly common thing for Jacob Malkoun. You would expect, and even against Andre Petroski, it was kind of a weird thing that it ended up being a finish. That was his only finish win in the UFC. So I'm going Malkoun by decision, plus 225. Hit it. Sometimes I just got to remind myself what some of these sound drops are. I don't know why I'm so lazy in changing some of them either. I like all of them. It's just like they're not ideal for what I end up using consistently and steadily throughout the course of a podcast. Anyway, next up, we have a light heavyweight matchup between Junior Tafa and Kevin Christian. They're doing it again to Junior Tafa.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
Junior Tafa is the minus 220 favorite. Kevin Christian, the plus 185 underdog. Okay. All right, let's talk about Junior Tafa, the favorite first. The 6-5 professional, 29 years old. I mean, since coming into the UFC, because obviously he had success like as a kickboxer and glory. It wasn't like he was the best kickboxer in the world, but like obviously this guy, where his strengths lie is in the striking overwhelmingly. Any dude named Tafa, any variation of the name Tafa, that's where they're going to be at their best. He has pro boxing experience too. I remember watching him knock out Tsuyoshi Sudario, the sumo wrestler, in Ryzen 40 back in December of 2022. But since coming into the UFC, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2-5. His last win was a knockout over Sean Sharaf at heavyweight, October of 2024. The only other win was the round 1 knockout over Parker Porter, August of 2023. He has taken losses to Muhammad Usman. He got finished via leg kicks and ground and pound by Marcus Rogerio de Lima. Got submitted by heel hook by Walter Walker, who hasn't. Submitted by Tuco Tokos and submitted by Billy Elikana. Now he's fighting Kevin Christian. 9-3 as a pro, 31 years old, 80-inch reach, and 6'7" at light heavyweight. I mean, that's a big floppy head on a pedestal for Junior Tafa to hit. I'll give you that. So I could totally see him Stefan Struve, Kevin Christian unconscious or whatever. But when you look at Kevin Christian, 5 of his career wins by submission, 4 by knockout. He's been knocked out once in his 3 professional losses. The other 2 were by submission in Brazil, like in Brazilian regionals. And those fights happened about a decade ago. The last loss was to Billy Ellicana by rear naked choke, which was actually Junior Tafa's last loss back in January of this year. So they share that in common. They both were rear naked choked by Billy Ellicana, but Kevin Christian got a triangle armbar against Francisco Mazio on the Contender Series September 2024. So he hasn't been the most active here over the last couple of years. But in LFA, he has at least one finish over Miguel Porta. It's not a robust professional record for Kevin Christian, but he's fighting Junior Tafa. Most of his career wins are by submission. He's been able to knock people out too. So that, and most of his losses are by submission. It's just like too clear of a path to victory for Kevin Christian. We've always known what the path to victory is for Junior Tafa. And so I won't blame anybody for saying Junior Tafa to finally get a win in front of this crowd after, however many losses in a row. Tafa by knockout is -150. Christian by submission is +350. And you could do that, or you could go Kevin Christian money line +185. I think that's perfectly fine too. Kevin Christian by decision is +1,000. That seems possible. I don't think it's impossible. Is it more possible than Kevin Christian by knockout +550? I would go money line +185, or I would go Kevin Christian by submission. It's just like if you're a Brazilian who has won on the Contender Series by submission, most of your career wins are by submission. You're a huge freak of a light heavyweight. If you get Junior Tafa down to the ground, you're going to be able to submit him. You just don't get knocked out in the meantime. That's it. Don't get knocked out in the meantime. That's easier said than done. Again, I hope Kevin Christian knows to keep his head off of a broomstick that Junior Tafa is going to be swinging at. But I think that this is just too clear of an opportunity for an underdog here with a stylistic mismatch between the two. It's just wild to me to see Junior Tafa as the favorite in this circumstance. So give me Kevin Christian, money line, or by submission. Either of those are great. Hit it. Next up, we got a second middleweight matchup here. And by the way, I think Malkoun and Gerald Mearshart are actually going to be fighting at 190 pounds at catch weight. We were supposed to get a couple of other fights on this card that they just ended up getting replacements. So we'll get to those. But we have a middleweight matchup between Cam Ralston and Robert Brycek. Cam Ralston is the favorite at -190. Brycek is the +165 underdog. Let's talk about the underdog first. 18-6 as a pro, 35 years old, out of Poland. 12 wins by knockout, 1 by submission, 5 by decision, 4-3 in Octagon MMA. He wasn't ever a champion in Octagon. Some of his other professional losses were to Sadibou Sai was his second loss of his pro career. But he had a good run in Octagon, knocking out opponents that were 7-1, 28, 17-1, and 16-5. That was Abdul Rahman Drye, Lee Chadwick, and Samuel Kristofich. Then took about close to a year, had some fights that fell through. Debuted in the UFC against Ihor Potieria, lost by unanimous decision. Statistically in that fight, he got knocked down. He got outstruck. It was 30-27 on 2 of the judges' scorecards. Then he bounced back, fought Brad Tavares last September, knocked him out in the 3rd round. You like to see that. It was a good bounce back. But Cam Ralston, all right, he seems so fresh and new, born in 1995, 78-inch reach, 6'3". So he's got a 3-inch reach advantage, a 3-inch height advantage. He's 5 years younger. And after losing by decision to Torres Finney on the Contender Series, getting taken down 10 times, and that's not like as much the concern here against Robert Brychek. But he got a knockout over Brandon Holmes, a knockout of Andre Petrosky, a knockout of Cody Brundage, all from August of 2025 to January of this year at UFC 325. And before coming to the UFC and being on the Contender Series, he had been the champion in Shuriken Fight Series there at light heavyweight. Didn't fight guys with great records up until the Contender Series, but I think we're past that now. You know, one of his 3 professional losses was in his second pro fight to Jacob Malkoun by unanimous decision. It's kind of the thing with these Australian and New Zealander guys, like, and a lot of guys from Asia too, where it looks like I have no idea who this guy has fought up until this point. And then, you know, they get down to business when it's actually on the Contender Series and in the UFC. The fight with Torres Finney was now, you know, closer to 2 years ago because he had some fights in Australia in the meantime before coming back on the Contender Series and getting that win over Brandon Holmes. Brychek has only ever lost once by knockout, and that is a little concerning to me. You know, Ralston is younger and has that reach advantage. Ralston wins in a variety of ways. 7 submissions in his career, 6 knockouts, 1 decision. So, I mean, I don't think that this fight goes the distance. And in fact, for this fight to not go the distance, it's, come on. Doesn't go the distance is minus 210. I don't know what I do here. Like, your Pogiaria wasn't able to finish Robert Brychek. I think that Cam Ralston can. Cam Ralston by knockout is plus 400. By submission, plus 230. I think that's probably the path of least resistance, but you got to get there first. And Robert Brychek is going to offer you chances probably to knock him out in his own efforts to knock you out. Cam Ralston inside the distance is plus 115. That's where I would probably go with this. Because I think it's hard to figure out exactly what inside the distance method it would end up being. Like, I think if Cam Ralston is, you know, coming along well as a fighter at 31 years old on a 3-fight winning streak in the UFC, you have good fight IQ, you know, take advantage of the opportunities you have, and I think you could finish this fight in a variety of ways. So I'm happy to get plus money for Cam Ralston to win this inside the distance. If I'm going Robert Brychek to win this, I think you might as well go Brychek by knockout at plus 275. That's the most likely prop for him. The 2 most likely methods of victory props in this fight are both for Cam Ralston. So Robert Brychek by knockout plus 275. I think that's perfectly acceptable. But I like getting Cam Ralston at plus money to win inside the distance, which for this fight to go the distance at all would be unlikely in the first place. Next up, we've got a heavyweight matchup between Tai Tuivasa and Louis Sutherland.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
Now, Tai Tuivasa was supposed to fight Sean Sharaf. All right. They want Tai Tuivasa to get this win in Australia. Tai Tuivasa is the minus 220 favorite. Louis Sutherland, the plus 185 underdog. I'm going to have to go like a little bit of a reversal from where I've gone with Louis the past couple of fights. So let's talk about the underdog first here. Louis Sutherland, 10-5 as a pro, 32 years old, 6'3" with a 76-inch reach, 8 wins by knockout, 0 by submission, 2 by decision. Lost 4 fights combined by submission and decisions. Only won 2 fights combined by either of those, and he's never won by submission. 1-1 in PFL, 0-1 in Bellator. This guy was the Levels Fight League heavyweight champion. That means something to me. He fought some good guys in his professional career before coming to this point. He beat Alton Meeks. He fought Abraham Bobley in PFL. And lost by unanimous decision in Bellator Champion Series to Slim Trabelsi. I have more respect for Louis Sutherland than a lot of folks do. I probably, let's see, he was how big of an underdog? He was plus 320 against Walter Walker. I remember kind of being on that. He was plus 195 or something against Brando Pericic his last time out just last month and got knocked out despite the lack of professional pedigree that Pericic has. So I have to cool my jets on Louis Sutherland. This fight may be a little bit more his style. I think like beating Louis Sutherland, I think is meaningful. I like the matchups that he's been in, but um, he hasn't handled himself well in the UFC so far. Now, Tai Tuivasa, all right, 6'2", 75-inch reach, 33 years old. You know, this guy's at 13 wins out of 14 as a pro by knockout. 3 losses by knockout, 3 by submission, 3 by decision. He has lost 6 fights in a row dating back to September of 2022. His last win was that elbow knockout of Derek Lewis, February of 2022. He had been on a 5-fight winning streak that included a finish of Stefan Struve, Harry Hunsucker, former guest on this show, Greg Hardy, Augusto Sakai, and Derek Lewis. Hell of a winning streak. And a good 3-fight winning streak coming into the UFC in 2017 and 2018. Pro boxing experience. Look, this guy, we know what this guy does. He can be hard to finish by lesser men. He's swinging to knock you out. He wants to drink that beer out of that shoe at the end.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
But this was the logic too in his fight against Talison Teixeira, where he was the plus 250 underdog. Look, I mean, it's funny because the fight against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, he lost by split decision. That was a fight that he had no business getting a judge's scorecard on, but okay, it was a close fight on paper, but not if you watched it. I mean, like, it's not like Jairzinho did a lot to like get a huge margin of victory, but I think it was clear that Jairzinho was winning the striking of every round. So split decision, and let's see, where did that fight take place? Oh my God, Perth, Australia. Look at that. That fight happened in Perth, Australia, and a judge gave Tai Tuivasa a fight that he definitely didn't win. Wonder if that could come into play this morning. Now, just less than 4 hours from now. But against Talison Teixeira, Tai Tuivasa lost 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Talison lost steam by the 3rd round. Tai Tuivasa, if he wasn't so exhausted by round 3, he could have gotten a knockout over Talison Teixeira. That was real. And so does that say more about Tai Tuivasa? Does it say more about Talison Teixeira and his limitations? End of the day, Tai Tuivasa isn't 40. You know, he's obviously taken a ton of damage in the UFC, but his head, his body, they're made of different things than flesh. So it doesn't necessarily count. But this 6-fight losing streak includes a knockout loss to Cyril Gane, a knockout loss to Sergey Pavlovich, a submission loss to Alexander Volkov, a submission loss to Marcin Tybura, and then those last 2 decision losses we mentioned. That is a world-class stretch of opponents at heavyweight. And even if you don't think Talison qualifies, he could have beaten Talison. He got started slow, was happy to take too much damage, and there's not going to be the freaky physique factor or the younger athletic factor for Louis Sutherland like there wasn't for Talison Teixeira in these first 2 rounds. I think that both these guys will be swinging, little regard for defense. This is one that Tai Tuivasa can absolutely get back in the winning column with. And I think it's going to be easier for Tai Tuivasa to knock out Louis Sutherland than it will be for Louis Sutherland to knock out Tai Tuivasa. I don't think that this one goes the distance. If it does, then the fight sucked because they both lost so much steam and couldn't do anything by, halfway through the fight. I will say, like, it's the second straight fight that I'm picking Tai Tuivasa, which seems crazy, but especially in Perth, where let's just say it does go the distance. The judges have shown that they're willing to take some liberties to make Tai Tuivasa look better in front of his home crowd. Give me Tai Tuivasa by knockout, minus 130. Hit it. Next up, we've got another heavyweight matchup between Shamil Ghaziyev and Brando Perisic. Shamil is minus 110. So I got Shamil early in the week at like plus 140. Plus 140. It couldn't have been any lower than plus 120. Shamil was the underdog. He has taken money here. This is now even money, minus 110 each. Let's start off with Perisic. And you really got to go to Tapology to get the full feel for like how unusual Perisic's career. The Balkan Bear, 6-1 as a pro, 31 years old, 6'5" with a 79.5-inch reach. He's a big dude. 5 wins by knockout, 1 by submission. His only career loss is by submission back when he fought for the Hex Fight Series heavyweight title, May of 2024 against Rondo Raymond. As an amateur, 2-0, 2 first-round knockouts. First round knockout as a pro. Then a rear naked choke against 15-14-2 Kelvin Fitial in Shuriken Fight Series. All right, let's just move past that because that was a 15-14-2 opponent. Started off in Diamondback FC, a 2-0 opponent. Loses to 13-3 Randall Raymond, who right now is 14-3, 39 years old. Apparently a heavyweight, doesn't look that big. He's now mostly, it seems, in pro boxing. That was where his last fight was, and it hasn't fought since September of 2024. It was like the last leg of Randall Raymond's career, it seems, that he ended up submitting Rondo Perisic. Then he knocks out 0-0 to Monaco Phillips in SFL, knocks out 0-0 Orion Kinney, then comes into the UFC, first round knockout over Alicia Ellison, 5-1. And then gets the knockout over Louis Sutherland. So before both of those fights, I was like, Perisic, like, what do we know about this dude other than he's big and he has terrorized dudes that we don't know how good they are? And the one guy with like a professional resume behind him submitted him in round 2. And that was like the end of that guy's MMA career. I'd had to give him some respect since he knocked out Louis Sutherland just back a little over a month ago, March 21st. So 2 first-round knockouts in the UFC. You know, can't knock him for that part. Now, Shamil is also large, 6'4", 78.5-inch reach. What's that? Just like a little bit smaller than Brando. Now, Shamil's 36. That always catches me off guard because Shamil seems still like so new. He's been around for like a little less than 3 years since he was first on the Contender Series. But this is what he's done in the UFC. So before coming to the UFC, by the way, he had been undefeated fighting in AMC, Aries FC, Brave CF was his last 2 wins before. And one of those wins in Brave was over Darko Stosic. Then he submits Greg Velasco on the Contender Series, knocks out Martin Bidet. And Martin Bidet, whatever you want to say about how boring he was in the UFC or whatever, that was a guy that mostly won in the UFC. Had a 7-1 record in the UFC before getting cut for being too boring. Like that wouldn't apply to a lot of guys who were losing. I don't think you cut anybody behaving adequately with that good of a record in the UFC. And this is mostly affected heavyweights of all things, where you think like there's so many losing heavyweights near the end of their career that you could get rid of. Why are you getting rid of winning heavyweights just because they win in like boring fashion? It's a fight. And if you don't like the way that they fight, you can not let them do it. Anyway, so he knocks out Martin Bidet. He gets finished in round 4 against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. He got washed in that Fight Night main event. Beats Dontel Mays by unanimous decision. Knocks out Thomas Peterson. He is coming off a round 1 knockout loss to Waldo Cortez Acosta. And Waldo Cortez Acosta, what has he done, in that whole stretch of time? Because he's been very active since coming into the UFC. I mean, out of just since August of 2023, beat Lucas Brzeski, okay, Andrei Arlovsky, Robelis, Ryan Spann, Sergey Spivak, lost by unanimous decision to Pavlovich, but then beat Ante De Leha, knockout. Fishy circumstances of that whole stoppage with the eye poke and whatever, but then knocks out Shamil, then knocks out Derek Lewis. So Waldo's been on fire. Waldo's been one of the few risers at heavyweight to actually make it through the fire towards the top of the division. So very understandable why Shamil has taken money here and why I grabbed him early in the week as the underdog. He's got the size to not be like completely dwarfed by Perisic. He's got an actual professional resume of experience of fighting the best heavyweights in the world, a lot of wins in the UFC. Can Perisic knock Shamil out? For sure. That is how he's lost his only two, the only two fights he's lost as a professional MMA fighter. But that was Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Waldo Cortez Acosta. And for Perisic, there's still a long way to go before I think that guy can do that to someone beyond Louis. So if he does this to Shamil, all right, fast track him, really throw it, test him, and see who he can beat then, because clearly I don't have a read on what this guy's ceiling is at 31 years old. And if Shamil was 38, I don't know, heavyweights can go on for a while, but I think that Shamil money line here still makes a ton of sense at minus 110. He made a ton of sense as an underdog at like plus 140 or whatever. That was an absolute bargain. And I think for Shamil, let's say 3 of his career wins by submission, 9 by knockout. You could go a little more outside the box here and these two are going to be throwing, cans of ham at each other. So knockout for Perisic is minus 120. But knockout for Shamil is plus 275. That's not bad. Shamil by submission plus 450 is probably what I think the better value is. But even though that's only 3 of his career, wins, but Shamil inside the distance plus 160, that's where I'd probably go now that this is Pick'em if I wanted to find something that was plus money. Hit it. Next up, I believe we got 4 fights left. I'm moving along at a decent clip here, considering it's now 12:22 a.m. 4 fights, and we got Marwan Rahiki against Ali Schmid at featherweight. Almost a criminal matchup, because I believe Marwan Rahiki was supposed to fight Jack Jenkins. And so, you'll see, Rahiki is the minus 650 favorite. I don't know if that's enough. I tweeted as soon as this fight was announced, my God, Rahiki might commit a homicide at UFC Perth. Let's talk about Ali Schmid first. Ali Schmid, 4-2 as a professional. 25 years old, obviously plenty of time to get better. 3 wins by knockout, 1 loss by knockout, a loss by submission, 1 win by decision. Makes up his whole pro career. And, a pretty lengthy amateur career. He competed internationally. I always love to see that. Lost 2 of his first 3 professional fights. That was just back in May of 2023 and June of 2024. The opponents he has beaten as a professional: Dane Edge, 0-0 in Hex Fight Series. Sainarvat Sarizawat in Shuriken Fights, 0-2, March of 2025. Ford Gerbs, knockout, 0-0 in SFC, July 2025. And Jeffrey Mesa, 5-5-3 in Shuriken Fight Series, just March of this year. Marwan Rahiki, 8-0 as a pro, 23 years old, 7 career wins by knockout, 1 by submission, 1 on the Contender Series over Ananias Mulumba. October of 2025, got a knockout there in round 2. Won his UFC debut over Harry Hardwick by 2nd round knockout. Before the UFC, at least, was the Beatdown Promotions featherweight champion July 2025 over 6-1 Gabriel Schlupp. Was the Hex Fight Series featherweight champion May of 2025, beating 7-3 Samakade Kakimbo. Dude.
Fuck off. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
Look, man, like Ali Schmidt hasn't lost since his third pro fight. He's collected 3 wins since then. The combined record of all of his opponents that he's beaten as a pro is 5-7-3 in total. 2 of those were 0-0. 1 was 0-2. And Rahiki's legit. You can clown on Harry Hardwick, but there's levels to this. And this is a tier 2, 3 tiers above what Ali Schmidt has accomplished in his pro career. And it's not like Rahiki's 36 years old coming into the UFC either. He's 23 and getting better by the day, too. I think that I honestly think like this could be minus 1,500. And it would make plenty of sense to me. Rahiki should be the biggest favorite on this card, even over Jacob Malkoun, considering who his opponent is. And he was preparing for Jack Jenkins. Ali Schmidt has nothing to lose in this. I'll give him that. Rahiki by knockout is minus 200. What I'll say is like, it takes Rahiki a little bit of time to get his finishes that we've seen over the last few. Both of the times that Schmidt has been finished as a pro was in round 3 against opponents with a combined record of 6-4, because one was 0-0, the other was 6-4. If I was going to try to get a little bit more of a value or profit on this one, I would go Rahiki in round 2 by knockout plus 375. Hit it. But otherwise, like Rahiki, like to cover the spread is minus 600. Rahiki inside the distance is minus 500. Rahiki by knockout is minus 200. If you want to use Rahiki minus 200 as a parlay piece, sure. But I think that this fight is more likely to end with a little bit of time to go. Maybe Rahiki, needs a little bit of time to get going because this wasn't the opponent he prepared for. Schmidt might be on the offensive from the start since, again, he has nothing to lose here. That's where I'm going with that one. But again,
Fuck off. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
that is a criminal matchup to put together here. There had to have been another featherweight you could have thrown into this fight in Australia. Getting this win, this is a tough spot for Rahiki. You have to look awesome, or people are going to come away, saying it was a disappointing performance. I think that he probably does end up looking awesome here, but these are tough spots. Next up, we got 3 fights to go, and we have a flyweight matchup between one of my favorites here as the underdog, Tim Elliott at plus 155 against Steve Erceg minus 180. Let's talk about Steve Erceg, the favorite, coming off a unanimous decision win over O'Day Osborne, beating him 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Now, Erceg, all right, interesting story for Erceg, and I don't know if the UFC did him too many favors by rushing him into that title fight, but before he came to the UFC, he was an eternal MMA champion, obviously, the flyweight champion there. Almost everybody in Australia, it seems like they fought Steve Erceg at some point in their career. Same with Jack Della Maddalena. I mean, there wasn't a ton to Erceg's professional career before coming to the UFC either, but look at who he's had to fight in the UFC in a rather short period of time. So amazing. It was just a little over 2 years ago that he ends up finishing Matt Schnell. That was 3 fights in a row in the UFC after beating Alessandro Acosta and David Dvorak. His first 3 fights in the UFC. He was then ranked, 10th, 12th, something like that. Ends up getting the title shot against Alexander Pantoja. puts up a really admirable performance that goes the distance, loses 49-46, 48-47 on two of the judges' scorecards. He put up a very admirable performance in the biggest fight of his life. And there ends up being a big hangover effect from that, as we, as you see, because you don't go back to fighting, the guys that you fought before that. You get the bigger opportunities, and he gets knocked out by Kai Kara France. He loses by decision to Brandon Moreno in that Fight Night main event, which was a reasonably competitive fight, but it was 49-46 for Moreno on all three judges' scorecards. And then wins 2 out of 3 rounds against Ode Osborne. Ode Osborne, who now has won one fight, which was against Luis Garuli, since he beat Charles Johnson February 2023. So his last fight was a no contest, but Ode Osborne has one win in his last 6 fights. 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So it hasn't been great for Ode Osborne either. He also lost by decision to Ronaldo Rodriguez, 29-27 on 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards. That's what Usyk has been up to. Now, Tim Elliott, born in 1986, he'll be 40 in December. He has a 2-inch reach disadvantage. He's an inch shorter. I love everything about Tim Elliott's career, though. All the people he's fought, the way that he got his title shot against Demetrius Johnson, the admirably close performance that he had at a time when Mighty Mouse was thought to be, completely unbeatable, untouchable even. And it's been a lot of losses for Tim Elliott, sure, but he's always, been put against the best of the best at flyweight. Had to fight Deiveson Figueiredo, Askar Askarov, and Brandon Royval in a row back from 2019 to 2020. But look at Tim Elliott now. He has won 6 of his last 8 fights, dating back to July of 2020. Over Ryan Benoit, Jordan Espinoza, Tajiro Lembekov, Victor Altamirano, Sumata Hari, and Kai Asakura. The only losses in that stretch, a unanimous decision loss to Matheus Nicolau, 29-28 on all 3, and the submission loss to Muhammad Makayev. Muhammad Makayev, who still has not lost as a professional, and we're waiting for him to be back in the UFC so we can see if he's maybe the best flyweight in the world. When are they going to end that hiatus?
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
But the win over Asakura was really a big deal for Tim Elliott because, Asakura got rushed into a title shot too, coming straight over from Ryzen. But Asakura is not ancient. He's had some great fights with very high-level flyweights and bantamweights over in Ryzen. He's fighting Cameron Smotherman coming up on May 30th. The win over Kai Asakura was a big deal for Tim Elliott. That was someone in between someone like the Altamiranos and the Sumata Haris, and then the guys like Makayev and Royval. And that's 5 losses ago for Tim Elliott is Deiveson Figueiredo. Winning 6 of his last 8 is crazy for a guy at this level. What does Tim Elliott do? He throws unorthodox strikes, gets takedowns where he can. He's a very shifty grappler, loves to look for, guillotines and arm triangles. I don't know if that's necessarily how Steve Usyk loses, but I don't know how Steve Usyk would lose this fight. It's been a weird UFC run for him, and Tim Elliott's had so many fights in the UFC that logically here, I have to say Tim Elliott money line. I love Tim Elliott, so I'm happy to do that, to have more of a stake in him. But if you're Steve Usyk and you don't feel completely back on your winning ways after you fought Ode Osborne, this is a very dangerous guy to get matched up with. Now, most likely, let's say Elliott can't get Usyk down. Pantoja was able to do it a lot. No one else has been able to do it with high volume. Usyk is good at throwing, volume with his hands. I think that could be a problem for Tim Elliott. That's never been his strong suit. I don't know if he's ever landed more than he landed 116 strikes against Luis Galdino August of 2013. But other than that, the highest one was like 79 against Tajiro Lembekov. He got a knockdown in that fight. Tim Elliott is just like very herky jerky, very unorthodox. It's hard to break down matchups with Tim Elliott. So stylistically, I know that there are problems for Tim Elliott, but I think that there's still like we still haven't even seen all the stylistic matchups that might be a problem for Steve Erceg. So he very well win this. He could win this by decision. He could win this by knockout for sure. But Tim Elliott is very much in this fight. Plus 155. Give it to me. My heart's in it. Tim Elliott plus 155. And now we are on to the co-main event of the evening. And it is a lightweight matchup between Beneil Dariush and Killian Salkield. Salkield is the minus 350 favorite. Dariush the plus 285 underdog. Let's talk about Beneil first. Beneil, born in 1989. He's been around in the UFC since 2014. Fought so many of the great lightweights over time. You know, beat Michael Johnson and Jim Miller, James Vick. You know, he fought Edson Barbosa, beat Thiago Moises, Drew Dober. And this is like the weird thing with Beneil is like up until he got the Tony Ferguson win, it was kind of like George Sotiropoulos. I'm gonna another Australian, but I'm gonna Google that and make sure that I'm not. Yeah, George Sotiropoulos. And where it was like a very nice winning streak, but it was like, but who'd you beat up to that point? Then he beat Tony Ferguson at a time when Tony was well on his way down. Gets the win over Mateusz Gamrot, big deal. You know, got the knockdown, just got taken down 4 times, but he's now lost 3 of his last 4 fights, granted to some of the best fighters in the world. Got knocked out by Charles Oliveira, Arman Sarukian, got knocked out by BSD in his last fight at UFC 322, and has the decision win over a Renato Moicano, who in that fight at UFC 317 didn't look very focused, and even then he got the knockdown. Beneil ended up getting 5 takedowns in that fight. It was 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. It's just that like Beneil was born in the 80s. He's been in the UFC for a long time. And now that he's starting to suffer that many first-round knockouts in a row over really good against really good competition, that can start you on a really steep decline. And Killian Salkield, born in 1999, has a 3-inch reach advantage. He's 2 inches taller. He's 11-1 as a professional, undefeated in the UFC, counting the Contenders Series. He's won 3 of his last 4 fights inside the distance. 2 of the last 4 fights he has won by knockout. And the first few names don't mean a whole lot, like Gage Young and Anshul Jubilee. But then the decision went over, Ashmuz, where he got 8 takedowns, shows that there's that wrinkle to his game. Knocks out Nasrat Haqparast in devastating fashion, and then gets the neck crank against Jamie Malarkey at UFC 325. And remembering what he did to Nasrat Haqparast, and I remember being on Nasrat at the time, like, Nasrat Haqparast on a 5-fight winning streak that includes, wins over Jared Gordon and Esteban Ribovic, where he landed, 135, 146 strikes. He's been hard to knock out in the UFC. The only other guy to do it was Drew Dober. So I like Nasrat going into the Keon Salkield fight, and he got knocked out in devastating fashion. I think that Beneil Dariush is certainly like a live dog at plus 285. I think you can't ignore a UFC veteran who's been around the top that long like Beneil at plus 285. But what do I think is the most likely thing that happens here is we've seen this movie all too often is Salkield at, how old is he? Yeah, born in 1999, so not old, like what 26 years old or whatever. I think the most likely thing is Salkield gets a knockout, and the bookmakers agree that's at minus 250. His other knockouts came in the first round. He got knocked out in the first. I mean, I would say like Killian Salkield in round 1 by knockout is minus 105. I mean, That's the best value I can find for Salkiel. Round one is minus 140 if you want to go that way. By knockout isn't minus 250s, I guess, okay for a parlay piece there. And Salkiel to cover the spread is minus 300. Most takedowns landed is minus 180 for Dariush. Significant strikes landed minus 325 for Salkiel. Significant strikes over 29.5 for Salkiel. I would go under 29.5 significant strikes for Salkiel at minus 115 if he ends this with a big shot in round one. That's where I would go as a prop for Salkiel. I would say for Salkiel too, like under half a takedown. That's minus 200. There's not a lot of value to get here. So if you're not cool with Salkiel in round one by a knockout at minus 105, then I would say like go Dariush plus 285 because I can't find a number here that I like for Salkiel in the ways that I think that he wins this fight. I think like you could go maybe a little wild and do like Salkiel by submission. That's plus 750. So I'd go like Salkiel by knockout in round one, minus 105. Dariush plus 285 if you don't like any of these, not profitable numbers, or Salkiel by submission plus 750. That's where I'd go with that. That is a tough one where you're getting that much chalk for a guy against Beneil Dariush, who has, been one of the best lightweights in the world for quite some time. And you see new wrinkles to Beneil, the grayer his hair gets, he adds some wrinkles to his game. You see refreshed versions of him. I don't hate plus 285, but again, we've seen this movie a lot. Killian Salkiel looks like an absolute murderer, and what he did to Nasrat Haqparast really opened my eyes. And now we are to the main event of the evening.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
Carlos Paredes versus Jack Della Maddalena in a welterweight main event. Huge implications for both of these guys. As far as the welterweight title picture goes, I know it's hard to get there with JDM considering how he lost the title. And I think Maddalena, took money here. I think he was actually the underdog very slightly, and Paredes was the slight favor, maybe minus 120. Now it's pick him at minus 110. Let's start off with Jack Della Maddalena. So undefeated in the UFC, 18-3 as a pro, born in 1986. Came up gradually in the UFC, but then beat, Randy Brown, Basil Hafez, beat Kevin Holland by split decision, got hit by Kevin Holland 127 times. Knocks out Gilbert Burns, got taken down 7 times en route to that third round victory. Beats Belal Muhammad for the welterweight title, where Belal Muhammad landed 132 strikes, and some of his shots started to kind of do damage near the end of the fight. It was 48-47 on 2 of the judges' scorecards. And then he's coming up. So, when you look at the fight against Islam Makhachev, happened November 15, 2025, UFC 322, lost by unanimous decision. I would imagine, 50-45 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Statistically, Islam beat him 30-18 and had 4 takedowns in the entire fight. But Islam had 19 minutes of control time.
Oh, God. Take care of the underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
He got devastated by Islam Makhachev. And what troubles me about Maddalena up to this point is the Holland fight, the Belal fight. He got hit a lot. Kevin Holland almost beat Jack Della Maddalena. Belal Muhammad started off the fight getting absolutely pieced up in the boxing department. And then it was towards the last 2 rounds that Belal started putting some better stuff together. And ended up controlling for 3 minutes in that fight. I forget what rounds the takedowns were in, but between those two fights, getting hit 237 times between those guys, and against Kevin Holland, who is like this, that's not the caliber of welterweight you're fighting anymore. Not since the Gilbert Burns fight, where you did get taken down and controlled for 5 minutes of that fight before you ended up getting the finish. Carlos Paredes will have a 5-inch reach advantage. He's 2 inches taller. He's actually 3 years older, Paredes. And, with all the cigarettes that he smokes, he's probably like spiritually or like physiologically 8 years older. But what Carlos Paredes has accomplished in the UFC: one loss to Ian Machado Gary, where he got taken down 4 times. He also got outboxed in that fight. Ian Gary showed a lot of wrinkles to his game. Ian Gary looked like one of the best welterweights in the world the night that he beat Carlos Paredes. That was a big performance for him. And Ian Gary laid a little bit of the blueprint. I just don't know how easy that blueprint is to follow for a lot of people, because for Paredes, you knock out Mitch Ramirez, Trevin Giles, Charles Radke, Li Jiangliang, Neil Magny. You lose that fight to Ian Gary, and getting taken down 4 times was an important part of that fight. And Jack Della Maddalena has landed 1 takedown in his entire UFC tenure, and it was against Basil Hafez. If anything, he's had issues with getting taken down by certain people, 3, 4, 7 times. And then Carlos Paredes has now recovered with 2 straight knockouts since August of 2025 over Jeff Neal and Leon Edwards. So here's the concern. Carlos Paredes has never had to land too much volume, because none of his fights that he's won have ever entered round 3. The most strikes he's ever had to land in a fight in the UFC was 63, and that was in the losing effort to Ian Gary that went 5 rounds. But with his reach advantage, with Jack Della Maddalena's history of, the amount that he's been able to get touched in these fights against higher caliber opponents, the issue is Vallejo isn't a knockout guy. Kevin Holland, not necessarily a knockout guy. Carlos Paredes is a knockout guy. It's the only way he's ever won in the UFC. He's never won going the distance in the UFC. He's never needed a round 3 to get a finish in any of his wins. And that gets a lot more impressive when you're talking about Neil Magny, then Jeff Neal, then Leon Edwards. So if Jack Della Maddalena starts to get touched by Carlos Paredes, it's going to mean a whole hell of a lot more than when he was getting touched up by Vallejo and by Kevin Holland. There will be no split decision if you're getting touched 60, 70, 100 times by Carlos Paredes. You won't get those opportunities. And, Maddalena, 18-3, and the other 2 losses, he has 1 knockout loss. And it came in his first professional fight against Alden Bates, March of 2016. So, it's not impossible for him to get knocked out. Far from it. It's remote in his past. But if he is throwing his hands, landing, and JDM is not like a knockout artist in his own right. He's a well-rounded martial artist. He certainly can finish people by knockout, but those shots add up over the course of 3-5 rounds. And, he can finish the lesser fight. He was able to submit Randy Brown, and Carlos Paredes in his 7 career losses, but my God, only 1 in the UFC. His last loss before the UFC was in one Warrior Series, June of 2019 by decision. The knockout loss before that was for retreating from hooks in Chin Wu Men, June of 2017. This is where the route to victory is for JDM is probably by submission. Or decision. If if I was going JDM, I would go like method of victory, submission, or decision. Those are certainly on the table for a 5-round fight. And that's something that JDM has better success and experience in. So that's an interesting wrinkle to the fight is like JDM had a horrible 5-round fight. Maybe he has a little bit of PTSD from that fight with Islam Makhachev. That would make some sense. But, he also has had successful 5-round fights in the UFC. I'm not tripping on that, right? Yeah, obviously, the fight with Bilal Muhammad. So I see why it's pick'em. That makes sense. I believe in the title fight hangover when you just got decimated by one of the world's best fighters. And not only that, JDM in the fight with Islam Makhachev, it wasn't just that he was losing handily every round. It's that he looked defeated in the corner. He looked frustrated, confused. He looked like he had absolutely no answers and that and he looked emotional in the corners. I don't know. That's just not historically great for fighters coming off of losses like that and stepping into another big fight against a guy like Carlos Paredes who is coming to knock your head off of your body because he's looking for a welterweight title shot of his own. So, like I said, JDM by submission or decision makes sense. If I was going to go one of these guys' money line, I would go Paredes minus 110. I took Paredes money line before it was pick'em, but I think the real, like Paredes by knockout plus 150. I think just like if JDM is gonna get touched and there's 5 rounds for these guys to work, you're taking a lot of chances that the shot that you eat from Carlos Paredes isn't going to be the one to put you out. So that's where I go on that fight. I see the logic on both sides. The reason I'm leaning towards Carlos Paredes is because he's over his one loss. It wasn't that devastating of a loss. But Jack Della Maddalena has some demons to deal with in there in this fight. And Carlos Paredes is a demon himself. So you're fighting what, like 2-3 demons at the same time? What I like is that, the greater 5-round experience, and he's a more well-rounded martial artist for sure. That is all 13 fights for UFC Fight Night Perth. I put my bets on Twitter and on Instagram at RotoBrady and at RotoBrady MMA, respectively. And now I will show you my DraftKings lineups. I posted those on both of my social media platforms as well, but I'll just go ahead and show them to you. I made them early in the week. All right. So, I like to do, mix it up with at least one for each guy in the main event. So, Paredes, Killian Salkiel. Salkiel was expensive. Paredes was like 8,200. Tim Elliott, Perisic. I ended up taking Perisic a couple times because it just ended up making sense price-wise. And Shamil just like, he was cheaper, but it wasn't like something I felt the need to do. It wasn't an underdog that was going to like open up a lot of room in my budget like some of these other guys. So, and Colby and Tai Tuivasa, $200 left. Then I line up with JDM, Killian Salkim, Cam Ralston, Tim Elliott, Perisic, and Colby. $100 remaining. Last lineup, Carlos Paredes, Killian Salkiel, Kevin Christian, Cam Ralston, Dunmar Fan, and Tai Tuivasa. I can't believe I didn't use Shamil in those, but again, like budget-wise, was I not sharing that whole time? Yeah, look, here they are. Wasn't sharing that whole time. Shamil just didn't make sense from a budget standpoint. And like, I don't know, every win for Perisic seems like it's going to be a triple-digit performance. So it made sense. And that's probably a fallacy to try to like use as much of the budget as possible. But, I picked my underdogs. They were of the cheaper variety. Tim Elliott was very cheap. So these are my 3 lineups. Folks, this has been episode 209 of the Tap That MMA podcast. We got UFC Perth coming up in like 3 hours. Hope you get to listen to this before the card. Check out my recent interlude episodes. Check out the conversation I just had with the famous Will Davis of Derby City MMA in Louisville, Kentucky. I got more on the books coming up. Enjoy the Kentucky Derby. Enjoy these fights that are starting at 4 a.m. in Australia. Have yourselves a good weekend and peace.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.